Alrighty. All right. Thanks, everyone. Welcome to Military Table Conversations. I'm your host, Jen Barnhill. I'm a columnist with military.com. Military Dinner Table Conversations is designed to understand the conversations that are impacting our recruitment and retention decisions for military families based on a variety of different topics. Obviously, today we're here to talk about childcare. I am as my role as a reporter, I'm here to learn about what's going on from both the practitioner's perspective as well as the family perspective. So if you're here as a advocate or a person who is a practitioner in some capacity, I do want to hear from you as well. Because it is a complex ecosystem here that we're dealing with. We are going to start with meeting Kayla, as I mentioned earlier. We're going to hear from her. Then we're going to start some poll questions to get the conversation started. And what I would like to do after that is we'll ask if anyone wants to share and expand on those answers to the poll questions. So if you say, I have waited a month for childcare, I would like to hear more about that experience. What contributed to that wait time? And if you have a negative experience on one hand, I also want to hear from folks who have different experiences, maybe a positive experience. Where's the best practice happening? So we're here to hear from all sides. That said, I want to introduce Kayla Corbitt. She is joining as an expert in all things childcare. Her personal story, has stuck with me. She started with Operation Childcare, and now it's Operation Childcare Project, and is looking to solve this problem. I know that's a huge thing. I will let her kind of give her background, but she's won numerous pitch competitions for her efforts and is really well respected in this space on this topic. And we're excited to hear from her, learn what she has been hearing from families that she's working with, and also obviously on the DoD side too, keeping track of that. So Kayla, I'd love for you to introduce yourself, give a little backstory, and we'll get started.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me too. Childcare is, this niche set of knowledge that I have that I love to use anytime that I can because it has been built up over, 11-ish years. So where civilian and DoD childcare meet is really where a lot of my expertise lies. As Jen stated, I did start with Operation Childcare, who Yvonne is here with us as well. She helps me with that side. What I was trying to do when I started Operation Childcare was to really get a better understanding of the issues I was seeing, the issues that I was encountering. And I am fortunate that I am a military spouse. We are still an active duty family. And so why I'm fortunate in that is that it does give me really real time access to what families are feeling, what families are seeing. I am up to date on the information because I live it. And I connect with others who are also living it. So I recently formed the nonprofit, the Operation Childcare Project. The nonprofit does predominantly case management at this point in time. So we serve active reserves, retired, veterans, dual mil, and DoD civilians. That's it. The concept is that if you serve the mission, then we can serve you. And what we do in this case management is, one, we bridge gaps, right? The DoD and DoD entities know very much about DoD programming. Civilian entities know very much about civilian programming. The overlap of the two, where they're not overlapping where they should, that is really where our expertise is. Over the years, what we found is that families have felt left out of this process. They've expressed to us that they feel, forgotten. They don't feel like they have a voice. And that is something that my organization really aims to correct. There's many reasons why, right? They may feel like they don't have a voice. It might feel that they don't know who to talk to, that they don't feel like they've done it the proper way. They don't know what they're eligible for, so why even talk about it? And that's really what we're there to help them kind of parse. And that, in addition to a lot of the work I did through Operation Childcare, is that the traditional forms of childcare, your center care, that is, your 7:30 or 7 to 7:30 to 4 to 6-ish p.m., they all vary just a little bit there. we aren't seeing where they're meeting the needs of the military community. And that's because we have the non-traditional care needs. We need the hourly, the part-time, the overnight, the weekly, the weekend, especially when cost is kind of or the cost, it is not as cost effective as it used to be. So when we don't need full-time care, we certainly don't want to be paying, $300 to $400 a week to maintain that, assuming it's not private care. So that's a lot of what we do is that case management. We take people in who are either stuck in the subsidy process. They say they've applied. That is, I'd say 90% of what I'm seeing right now in case management is people who've applied for fee assistance, generally through DoD programming, who say they've been waiting 3, 6, 9, 12 months to get through and they're stuck. So we help them with that. Secondarily is traditional care isn't meeting their needs and they're not really sure what to do next about it. So we help them kind of figure out a plan A, B, and C on that front. And a lot of it is just education on their options. There's a lot of misconceptions about childcare, especially military childcare. There's a lot of confusion and people have really had to rely on the information they get from Facebook groups, which are great for a lot of reasons. I would say that most of the people who enter our case management find out about us because of a Facebook group. But also it does create kind of a trail of misinformation. Numerous acronyms do not help the situation when people just aren't really sure which acronym they're supposed to be applying to. So we really do a very niche targeted approach to figuring out childcare for military families. And then we take the stories that are shared with us and we use those to do program evaluations, to figure out gaps in care, to figure out what is the plug in the pipeline, like what is keeping families from being able to move through the process so that we can offer suggestions, so that we can help those who are doing this work already get more people through and serve more people. We want to be sure that resources are allocated appropriately. We don't want to duplicate efforts. So if there was a way for us to help someone, an organization, a company, whatever it might be, with what families are seeing, then we definitely want to do that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kayla, for sharing.
Yeah.
I am going to launch our first poll question here. It's pretty straightforward demographic information, wanting to understand family dynamics in the group. Obviously, I appreciate everyone answering because it gives us a place to start. Sometimes when you're looking for childcare for multiple children, that is a higher cost. And so we're going to have a whole nother conversation, which we'll be happy to have. And so what you mentioned, Kayla, what you're seeing, are there any particular hardships for the ages of children, or is it across the board? And I know that that can be really challenging, especially as young military families have new babies, that cost is
Mhm.
higher. What are you seeing? And then if anyone is willing to share any experiences when it comes to the number of children you have and maybe what those differences in finding care might be.
Yes, I do want to note before I start this conversation that the entire nation is in a childcare crisis. It is just that military families are disproportionately affected due to a number of factors, predominantly being we don't have a local support system, right? So what we're seeing in terms of more traditional care is that, yes, there are no infant spaces. So when we have someone who contacts us who says, I get off my maternity leave in 3 months and I'm trying to use, a military fee assistance program, it becomes something that we need to rush for because for the most part, if we are not seeing families apply for either center care when they get pregnant, so way before the child has graced this world, then they are not likely to get a slot. What we are also seeing in the civilian side, because part of what my organization does is we engage ourselves in the local community. So we join the early learning coalitions. We're part of the cohorts that are already doing civilian work so that we can be the military voice and part of that. And what we're seeing a lot of centers do, because there is a civilian childcare crisis as well, right? they are actually reducing their number of infant spots because the ratios are so low already and cost is so high. They're not profiting from that. They're still operating on very razor thin margins here, and they're finding that it is easier for them to expand older ages so they can take in more children, which helps them not really skate as much on that really thin line. So our infants there are less spots available all the way around. As the civilian community struggles with that, we are going to struggle with that. I'm also seeing in the civilian side that's affecting military families is the push for quality childcare. Not saying quality childcare is not needed. I'm just saying that as it's becoming more evident that the quality care is necessary for child development, we are seeing local organizations implementing new standards somewhere along the lines of you cannot receive state subsidy unless you do this, or you will not get, this assistance unless you do this. What is happening as a result is that less and less centers are being able to stay open because the standards are getting just so high that they are not, when you're one person, when you're running a home center, which is more likely to have that non-traditional care or the more affordable care, you cannot be both an administrator and a program director and an educator and be the one responsible for the children. It just becomes too much for them to take on. So as we are pushing for higher quality and honestly demanding that from our centers, we're seeing less availability as a result. So it really is a very double-edged sword in this. And the last one is when we have children, multiple children across multiple ages, what becomes the issue there is what works for all of them? What doesn't create such a burden on the family to drop one off at a center, drop one off at a different center because they had space for them, then drop some off at school, and then set up before or after school care? What if there's a short day? What if it's a long day? What if they have TDY? It is finding something that spans the gambit of what does my day-to-day look like and what do I do in an emergency? When you have an infant and a toddler and a school-age child, that is 3 entirely unique care plans that need to be created. And that's a lot to ask of families.
Yeah. So that said, thank you, Kayla. Is anyone here kind of have had that lived experience of what it's like to approach finding care for a variety of different scenarios? Is anyone willing to share some of their story or experience? That's the whole reason we're here. And as a reporter, I am okay with awkward silence. So we'll just wait until someone's willing to share. And if you'd like, you can come off mute to indicate that you'd like to share, or raise your hand as well. Vaughn, go for it.
Hi, thank you for having me, by the way. I was just going to agree with Kayla. Like, I actually go into classrooms, infant and toddler classrooms, and I assess the teachers on how they're interacting with babies and how they're interacting with toddlers, and that's becoming more and more of a thing. So I can understand how looking for good childcare is just extremely difficult, and it goes across the board. I just wanted to mention that I've just been in England actually, and there's a brilliant website, pretty much, I'm going to read you a bit from it, but it's called pregnantandthenscrewed.com. Sorry about that. But it's a real website, and it says, in addition to pregnancy and maternity discrimination, women encounter a multitude of barriers when trying to have children and a career, included being reliant on one of the world's most expensive, dysfunctional childcare systems, which sounds very similar to what Kayla was explaining about the military. So I'm here on a fact-finding mission, just pretty much like yourself, and I want to help in any way I can. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you. And feel free, anyone is welcome to put resources or articles in the chat if you want to share that. Thank you. Does anyone else have any experiences they want to share with accessing multiple childcare at the same time as you've moved?
Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm active duty and I've had to move quite a few times. The childcare is challenging. We have 3 kids. Um, 2 of them are school age and 1 is preschool. And we've tried our hardest to keep them all in the same daycare, just because going to multiple centers to pick up kids, sometimes it can be almost an hour one way to pick up and drop off your kids, and that just adds to your really your work day. No one wants to be driving around with 3 kids that are screaming and hungry and just want to go home for an hour. It's too much. I recently took a 2-year unaccompanied overseas, and my civilian spouse has a job that is 30 minutes in the opposite direction of the closest military installation. So we decided to go with an off-base provider. We also have a special needs child, and he was getting kicked out daily from our CDC. So when you have a civilian job, picking up your child every single day because they can't meet his special needs, it just wasn't working for his civilian job. Once we did find a civilian center that was able to take them on, and it is working out really well, but it's also draining our bank account. So we recently found out about My Child Care Aware, and they're supposed to help us with the fees, but it's been almost 90 days working with them, and I still don't have approved process. Like it is a very challenging process. So even though they say you're waiting for a CDC slot, and then there's supposed to be this other alternative, but really there's no win in this situation. I was just on the phone for an hour with them, and even though I've had all my stuff in for quite some time, my child care center has sent their stuff in, and now they're telling me because they're not nationally accredited, like they're licensed with the state, they're a high-end childcare. They don't have any whatever you call them, penalties or anything like that against them. They do transportation to and from the child care center. All 3 of my kids can go there, but because they're not nationally accredited, we could be denied. So there's so many loopholes to jump through, and we spend so much time applying for these things. I like it in the military community. Everyone touts that, we're here for your family and here to take care of you, but are you really? I mean, I can't get into the child care center on base. They kick my son out all the time because he was special needs. So now I'm applying for assistance, and they tell me they're a small nonprofit group, and they just don't have the resources to deal with the amount of packages going through. And it's hard for me to get upset at them too. Like, it's not their fault, and then they help me and they review my package, and then there's just all these things that the government is putting on us that I can't jump through. So that's my experience. Those are just the things that I wanted to bring up. Like, they say all these programs are out there, but it doesn't really feel like they're really out there to help us. I've been working on this process for 90 days now, and I still don't have an approved package, and they told me it's probably going to be another couple weeks before it goes through. So.
And Rachel, can I just ask a clarifying question? So you said it's been 90 days since they had this application. And then from there, what is the best case scenario for you? Like, you think, will that just be reimbursement coming your way for what you've already paid out of pocket, or starting that point? What are you expecting to be the solution once that 90 days, or once you get to the next step? What are you anticipating?
So I asked those questions too. Like, they've been going there for a while, so they told me it's they're not going to backdate from the moment that they started. They said there's a whole bunch of different things. Like they say back pay is acceptable, but it all depends. It depends on from when I submitted my application. It depends on when the child care center got approved. There's all these things, and it just depends. Like there's no final answer on when all these things, and that's the other frustrating part. So I go on my military childcare, where you're supposed to go to submit your request to do the CDC. I was denied for the CDC, so I immediately go to the fee assistance program. I was approved, but there's another 90 days after that. There's all these other processes. You think when you get accepted in this fee assistance program, that should be good enough, but I had no clue about this whole other 90-day process after that happened. And that's really my frustrating part is militarychildcare.com makes it seem very easy, but it's really not. And my husband tells me all the time, he's like, I applaud you for doing all this paperwork. I would have gave up months ago. You just keep doing paperwork though and trudging through. So I applaud you for that. But in reality, neither one of us really have time to do all of that, especially with a family with 3 little kids. No one has time to sit on the phone with these people and track your package or fill out all these paperworks or track down people to go get things done. And then on top of it, expecting if there's a childcare shortage, how do you expecting families to be or childcare centers to be nationally accredited on top of that, and that's the only way you'll get fee assistance? Like that doesn't. It just they don't seem to help each other. Is what I'm saying. So it's high end. I'm paying a lot out of pocket. More than we can probably afford, but we have to do something with our kids. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but that's our story that we're currently living.
Thank you so much for sharing, Rachel. Hopefully we'll get to talk through some of these topics, throughout this conversation. And I'm sure Kayla has a lot of experience that she can share with you as well. Before we go into the next topic, I would love to hear if anyone else has anything they would like to share about their experiences, how they maybe are similar and or different than Rachel's experience. We will get into talking about Child Care Development Center, wait lists. Right now I have a question out there asking about wait lists, what the average wait times are. I think that we often hear about waiting for medical care, and childcare wait lists are, very long as well, and impact our decision making. So I'd really love to hear if anyone can speak to a wait that they've had to experience in that way, and what that maybe, how that impacted your family.
I think 2 things that maybe I have in common with what Rachel was sharing is I also have a civilian job. I'm the spouse in our family, and I have a civilian job, and my civilian employer most definitely does not have the same level of tolerance for understanding not having set up childcare. So definitely there are additional, I guess, stressors there. And then the other thing is, like, my husband currently is on an unaccompanied tour, but because it's not officially a deployment, I've been told that I don't have access to the same childcare benefits that I typically would if it was officially a deployment. But we were not able to go. It wasn't by choice unaccompanied. We were not actually able to go. So there's definitely a lot of misinformation at the very least.
And is that message, Julie, I'm sorry if you don't mind me asking a follow-up question, is that coming from CDC, like child development centers? Where are you hearing that message of priority?
CDC. we were trying, my children are school age, but we homeschool. So that's a whole nother situation, because if your kids are school age, then you only can get after school care, but I don't need after school care. I need during the day care, but that's a whole other situation. But from the CDC is where I was given that information.
I don't know, Kayla, I have, and some of these things that Rachel and Julie are sharing, have you had any, is there official response where we're talking misinformation here? What are you hearing? How does that relate to what they've just shared?
Yeah, so yes. The answer is yes to all of the above. You know, in Rachel's specific situation, there is a great deal of misinformation there. This is kind of part of the overarching issue. I will say both in Julie and Rachel's situation, these stories are not unique. That doesn't make them less devastating. It doesn't mean that, you know, it isn't, you know, crushing their family, their mental health, all of those things. It just, these are the stories that I hear every single day, multiple times a day. So I do want you both to know, as maybe not helpful as this is, you're not alone in this. But this is exactly why I'm doing what I'm doing, right? There is not a clear public guideline on what these programs can and cannot do, and the timelines they do them on, and where you should contact if you're not making it within that deadline. So the issue, for example, that Rachel said, where she's, you know, calling on the phone, we always encourage email, and we have, you know, whole templates that we give to families for this reason, because they are not a small nonprofit. They are actually $100 million a year nonprofit. So they very much have the capability of processing this. So I do applaud you as well, Rachel, because this is exhausting, and it shouldn't be. The way that it should have worked is if they were removing you from the CDC, which a whole lot of thoughts and feelings about that. But if that was the case, then you should have automatically been enrolled into the NCCYN, the My Child Care in Your Neighborhood program. You do not need a state or a national accreditation for that. They do have centers that they prefer, that are nationally accredited, and you do get caught in that catch-22, right? Of you, it's easier for you to do it with a nationally accredited center, but the result is that you're paying out of pocket until the reimbursements start. So you could be paying way more than you normally would. So we're talking, you know, $2,000-ish a month. Whereas if you've gone somewhere else, it may be, you know, $1,000 to $1,500 a month, while you wait for the eventual hope that it will be paid for. There is back pay. You're not wrong in that. That's not misinformation. Like, there is back pay. It is from the time that the application, it's supposed to be from the time the application is submitted and you're found to be eligible. That being said, again, there are no clear guidelines on that. What we have heard is 90 days back pay. There are ways to request exceptions to policy around that, because we do have families that sometimes sit for a year or two waiting for approval, where they're asked for documents over and over and over again, and they keep sending them in, and so it becomes a cycle. In Julie's situation, my guess is that the CDC was referring to, there is what they call respite, right, for families who have a service member who's deployed. So this was misinformation, right? Because yes, you would have qualified for that. Does it mean you would have accessed it though? No. It is very space A. So it would, with CDCs being maxed out the way they are, with the low staffing numbers, with FCCs dwindling, I just don't want you to feel like, it sounds harsh to say like you wouldn't have accessed it anyway, but I feel like sometimes just knowing that information, just knowing that that wasn't an option for you, can sometimes help, rather than being told, well, you could have it, but this is the situation, right? And so in those cases, we would help people, find their teams, but it is a pretty hefty lack of transparency in this process, and that is what we see a lot, and what we try to really combat with what we do in our organization, to give families the ability to plan. I'm sure if Rachel knew that she would be paying out of pocket for care no matter what for a year or two, she may have made a different choice in where she sent her children or what she opted to do. So we really push for that transparency, and then that's what we help with. But you guys you're not wrong. You have been misinformed in some places, and I apologize, but you're not wrong.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I know there were some folks chatting or in the chat talking about wait lists. I'd love, if you're comfortable, to hear more about what your experiences were on the wait list, because I just launched another question that kind of gets to, like, what are the costs of these waits? Like, are you making decisions where you have to go unemployed for a time? Does that impact where you get to live? Or, what is this impact? What is the impact of these waits? I'd love to hear more from everyone on that. And again, I don't mind awkward silences. Because the whole point is to learn. No one's waited? I can't believe this. Can't believe that no one's waited and had to make a decision based on the waits. I know it's hard if you don't want to come off mute, but
I mean, I can speak again and say that I just decided I work remote, so now my kids just stay at home with me because there wasn't another option. So I take care of my kids while I work from home, which is a massive, massive stressor in our family.
yeah. May I ask what
I would.
sorry.
I just wanted to agree with Julie. Like, it's just not an option for our family. So we made do, or we found maybe a childcare center we regret ever having to put our kids into to allow us to work. Sorry, Julie, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
but,
not at all.
100% agree with Julie. It's extremely stressful on the family. I'll let you. Sorry, Julie.
May I ask, Julie, what field you're in, and Rachel, if you don't mind, like, did you kind of pivot to that, like, remote option because of this, or was that something you already were doing? I think, I'm curious to see where some of these moments are impacting family decision making.
No, I was already working remote, thankfully. I work in medical software, but it's a typical office job, but only at home. So having kids at home, I mean, you can imagine having your 2 kids sitting in your office all day. Like, it's not feasible. But we do it because if I walk away, it's more than half of our income.
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that, Julie. Maria, I saw you came off mute. Would you like to share?
Speaking for myself and our family alone, we've navigated all of these things, and I really resonated with what Rachel shared originally with the different schedules and realizing the primary solution for the military is the CDC and then FCC. And even those still don't meet the non-traditional needs, right? And someday they won't be non-traditional. Someday they'll be just the childcare that we need for our family. But with dual shift work for both of us on 12-hour shifts on different times, you can imagine that the CDC wouldn't work for that. And an FCC really wouldn't either. And so to some of your questions earlier, while we have been on the wait list, it wasn't even a good option for our family. And so we really, for the first 8 years, weren't even eligible for that fee assistance or for the military childcare on base, just due to what our family needed to be able to serve and to be able to make sure our kids were taken care of. So the wait list isn't really getting at the issue in both Rachel's situation and Julie's, where it's actually not giving the full lens of what families need to be successful, and to be able to be financially secure for their families. Um, it- and we're not even talking about being comfortable, right? Like, I think we're really just talking about, just like Julie just shared, like, I think it was Julie, losing half your income is a deal breaker, right? And so how, what options are there in the future to be more flexible for families to meet them exactly where they're at? Because we've seen the numbers. We're not in a recruiting boom right now. And so we really need all of these families. We need them to be able to serve. We need them to not only want to serve, but their family has got to be taken care of. And so if they need to work or want to work, how are we going to meet them where they're at so they can do that? Because this is more than just being comfortable. It's a national security issue at this point. And how do we communicate that carefully?
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that. And to that, response, like what I think I asked earlier a poll question about like how are you accessing your childcare if you're using au pairs, and I think you're speaking to kind of like the alternatives that are non-traditional. I say non-traditional, like you said, that's just a term, but that do not fall under coverage perhaps for reimbursement quite at this point. I feel like there have been pilots on those types of topics, but I would love to hear more about what that looks like, from anyone who's willing to share, whether that's like, how do you do that? I mean, like, you're paying out of pocket, you're essentially like, are you paying to work? Like at certain points, like I feel like that must mean that you're paying to work, you're paying to serve your country. If anyone's willing to share about that, I would love to hear more.
At the risk of oversharing, I'll jump in. You asked about other pilots, and I'm only really familiar with one when it comes to full-time care outside of the CDC, outside of FCCs, and then outside the fee assistance programs for center-based care in your neighborhoods. And that's the Child Care in Your Home pilot program. And again, speaking as Maria Quinn here, we have been able to utilize this since it was first published in the news a few years back. And so that was a game changer for our family, because it was the first time that a non-traditional care was available where you could receive fee assistance. And so I've poured my heart and soul into ensuring that we can access it ourselves. I resonated earlier, just pounding my head against the wall, trying to figure out the paperwork on a weekly basis and hire a nanny. So it's a whole new way to look at childcare. And it hasn't been utilized extensively yet just because it's such a small program. However, I'm excited to have that model out there, have families accessing it, giving feedback, and doing more, maybe a longitudinal study on how did that impact their ability to serve, where they weren't just paying out of pocket. And you just nailed it. We are absolutely paying to serve for a few years.
Yeah. It's hard. I think that's a family decision point. So that's something that's really interesting to me is understanding decisions, also understanding what do you do when you run into these brick walls? Like obviously folks are here participating, sharing their stories, which is part of it, right? But how do you elevate this concern if you're both serving? Like obviously you can tell your command like, hey, I have a childcare issue right now. That's a one-off situation, but this is a bigger thing than just that. So has anyone had an opportunity to kind of share this before with leaders or their concerns? I know that's something Kayla had been looking into as well. If they've had any responses, either from CDCs, if you talk to a CDC and they, give an answer to you. Rachel?
So I will say I'm currently stationed in Germany, Ramstein, and as a family, we chose not to come over here. One, because I'm active duty and my husband is not a good stay-at-home parent. It just does not work for our family. he needs to have a job, and he really enjoys his civilian job, and he wouldn't be able to continue that job in Germany. So we decided to do an unaccompanied tour so he could continue to work. The other part of that is the childcare situation over here. And I see it all the time. New people come in and they do go months, and they drive an hour and a half to go to 3 different installations to drop their kids off at 3 different CDCs and schools before and after care. There are mill-to-mill that come in and they don't have childcare, and usually it has become so norm around here that leadership is almost immune to it, and we just accommodate via telework and things like that. But again, just like Julie alluded to, like, telework is an option, but when you have toddlers and young infants, you can't telework with, you just can't telework with kids in the home. They need attention, and you can't ignore them for 8 hours just because you're an adult in the house and you can make sure that they're safe. They still need care and attention. Is the whole reason we send them to a childcare, so they can get out that energy and play and learn and things like that. And if we're expected to work and do those things at the same time, it's the kids really who are losing out. It's just not an option. But that is what we do overseas, especially because overseas we don't have a lot of the options that we do in the stateside with the civilian childcare centers and things like that. It's significantly reduced. But telework is what we go to, but you heard it from Julie on it's not really an option. They're really just staying home to take care of their kids.
Heather, I saw you unmuted. Would you like to share?
Yes. Hi, are you guys able to hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'd like to first thank you guys for hosting this, Jennifer and Kayla, for sharing all of your insight. I join from a little bit of a different perspective. I do not have children looking for childcare. I work with a lot of our families on the Marine Corps side. I oversee our family readiness programs for our special duty assignments. So I work with recruiting families out in the Western recruiting region and then for the depot at MCRD. And so for San Diego, we have the constant battle of childcare that's easily accessible. And then for the recruiting region, people aren't near an installation. So it's challenging to find something that's, feasible for them. And I just wanted to speak to this in particular because you had spoken particularly about leadership, and that's a big part of the reason why I'm here right now, is because I'm trying to help find creative ways to bridge the gap for childcare, especially for our recruiting families, because their access to feasible, accessible, and inexpensive childcare for our Marines and their family members is something that our leadership is extremely invested in, because it is a huge problem right now for us. So our leadership is, spinning whatever wheels they can to help us in that. So that's kind of why I'm here right now, because we do have a lot of leadership eyes on this, and we're working to get creative in whatever way we can. So I'm definitely absorbing all the knowledge that you all are sharing. And for the active duty members and the spouses that are sharing their personal experiences, I feel for you. I work with a lot of our families that deal with the same types of things. So thank you for sharing your experiences. But yes, I just want to pop on and say, yes, I feel personally that our leadership is engaged in helping us find ways, but I agree with Rachel, is that, telework only goes so far. And when you're doing a special duty assignment, teleworking isn't really an option anymore. So finding other ways to close the gap is really important at this point.
Thank you, Heather. I appreciate that. And I think that this is why these conversations happen is, okay, so you're coming from 2 different or multiple different sides of this issue, right? And so if leaders are invested in making change, but families don't necessarily know how to elevate concerns. So the question I'm asking right now that Kayla kind of highlighted is that how are we missing this? Like, where is this misinformation coming from? And maybe any of the families who are on might be willing to share, like, I remember hearing someone mention something to a CDC worker. Well, perhaps that person didn't elevate that concern through the channels that would then ultimately lead to someone like Heather. And maybe Heather, you can speak to where they should be going if they're having these concerns. And obviously these conversations are fabulous, and we get to some of these issues. But where can families go if they're stuck? And maybe that's a question for everyone. Where do you go? Maybe family members, where do you go if you run into these problems? And then where would you like to go? Like, where would you like to see resources or a place to provide feedback? First to the families, then we can maybe talk about it from the other side. If that's okay. If any families would be willing to share, where would you like to get information? Where would that be most helpful for you? I have 3 kids, so I know for me, I'm like, I'm a Google searcher. You're in the middle of the night, I want that, but I don't know if that's just me. I want to be able to find a resource that's clearly laid out and tagged properly on a website. But that's just my personal preference. Julie?
And that's what I was going to
and
add, Jennifer, is I'm also a military spouse myself. My husband is also active duty. So to provide some relatability, I kind of wear all the hats similarly to Kayla, is that I don't have children. That's the one thing that's a little different here, but I serve our military members, but I'm also one of us. So like the struggles and the things that we go through, I feel on a very different level on the very many different hats that we wear. And whether it's through finding information on a Google forum or a Facebook page or these late night cry for helps that we might see. I agree that those are the things where I think a lot of our spouses are finding information for sure.
Yeah, thank you. I saw Julie, you also unmuted. Did you have?
I mean, if there was just a source of truth, any one specific, source of truth that I could go to, because I think that's part of this big issue, that I get one piece of information here, and if you want another piece, then you go there.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I agree.
Yes, to the next place. It's yeah.
Okay. And in theory, and this could be anyone on the provider side or the advocate side, where do you think does there exist something that should be considered that source of truth, or that the military would say, here, this is where you should go, and that's supposed to be the source of truth? Is there one? Does that exist?
So yes and no. The issue is that program responsibility is siloed. So some programs fall under OSD, some programs fall under the DoD, and so they'll have different stopping points as you start to raise the issue. As far as kind of like an accountability overview of all of it, most families are pointed towards militarychildcare.com or Military One Source. Again, very limited information there because they can't really span the civilian and the DoD side. And that is actually the entire reason that my organization exists right now, is to make all of this information publicly available and transparent. Part of what we do is called accountability, which is depending on the program that the family is applying for, depending on the program the family is stuck in, we help them create that accountability and oversight piece by creating a paper trail and then copying in the appropriate people to get that in solution. What we see a lot of is that if people are having issues with CDC, FCC, something like that, that's a DoD program. So that'll go up through CYS or CYP, but usually ultimately stops at whatever the regional CYP is. And unless the family has the bandwidth to continue fighting that on their own, they're not going to really get a resolution. It's not going to go beyond there. If it's on the OSD side, it goes through whoever the contractor is, which right now, Childcare Aware. So Childcare Aware will take complaints about Childcare Aware to themselves. And then they're supposed to then pass them on to OSD. And so we help on that side as well. So if it's one of those programs, then we create the accountability on that side. where we are copied in on all of the communication so that it does keep progressing. And then if it stagnates, we are able to then escalate up above that, which sometimes does come down to state representatives.
So I know, and this, everyone please correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember reading that because this is not an entitlement, because childcare reimbursement is not an entitlement, it is kind of allowed to be this kind of fluid, very, no source of truth. That's that anyway. I don't know. That's not a question, and I need to go back more towards questions. That's more of a statement. But if please correct me if I'm wrong. But I do want to open the floor to make sure that everyone who wants to share has an opportunity to share as we approach the end of the hour. Are there topics we haven't covered related to childcare that obviously not everyone needs to come off mute, but if you want to pop them into the side and we can talk about them, I'd really want to give the folks who are joined the floor. Rachel, would you like to share something?
I did. Kayla just mentioned about the stovepipe and the differences between the services even. So I know I mentioned the nationally accredited thing, and he did say that on the phone, the childcare, where he said the Air Force has a specific requirement that they have to be nationally accredited, whereas some of the other services don't. That is just very frustrating as being an Air Force member. Some of the other things within the CDCs, one of the things I hated being in the Air Force is that they made the kids wear shoes and keep the lights on during nap time. I was always frustrated, like as a little kid, what little kid is going to sleep with the lights on? But they said it was for safety. And within the Air Force, I know that they have a one place in San Antonio that deals with all the child cares around the Air Force. And I just don't agree with some of the, like even their menus were made for adults and not little kids. And I get it, they want them to eat healthy foods and things like that, but it never felt like parents were running the CDCs and thinking about the kids. They were politicians who never had children making all these rules. And I don't know about the other services, but I'm really frustrated with the Air Force's way that they run the child care program. They just didn't make sense from a parent's perspective. And that's what I mean about the stovepipe. I don't know what goes on in the other services and how they do things, but I'm extremely frustrated with the Air Force one. And here in Ramstein, they even said the Army CDCs and the Air Force CDCs are totally different. And there are parents willing to drive an hour to keep their kids in the Army CDCs because they shut the lights off, make foods that their kids like, let their kids take their shoes off during nap time, and ensure that they got a restful nap every day. And that's just, parent conversations that happen. On the other hand, with the leadership, I will say I never liked going to my leadership about personal problems. Professionally, they view you different, especially being a woman in the active duty. Me talking about my family problems just didn't, it hurt me professionally. So I would say that there needs to be, our leadership isn't who we should go to. Do I think they should be aware? Yes, but we're a man and a woman complaining about their family issues isn't viewed the same. That I'll end there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we can understand and empathize with that statement, if not, perhaps personal experience with that. But thank you for sharing. Again, we're wrapping up. I mean, there's 100 things I want to ask about branch differences and how, people, and, I have a million questions. So if it's okay, I hope to follow up with some of you after, as these conversations help inform the articles that I write. I'm just, sending an email, we'll get some clarifications. But before we wrap up, does anyone else have anything they would like to share? We can also share off the recording, but I will still ask you, hey, can I talk with you about this on the record at some point? We're really hopeful to understand these problems and make them and elevate them so that we can have this conversation, not just in here, but publicly as well. Does anyone else have anything else they want to share? Well, if not, thank you, Kayla, for joining as our guest. I will stick on a little bit longer, but I want to make sure to give everyone the opportunity, to ask any follow-on questions of Kayla. She's a wonderful resource as well. So once we stop the recording, if you have any questions, and there's other advocates in this call who also have great information. But thank you for joining the official call, and I'm going to stop the recording, and we'll say goodbye.